The alien princess descended from her shimmering starship like a comet in a tailored diplomatic gown, her presence commanding even the humans bustling below. The city seemed quaint from her perspective, a chaotic playground of tiny creatures struggling with cumbersome machines and fragile clothing. She paused mid-step on the sidewalk, tilting her head as she observed a man juggling a coffee cup, briefcase, and smartphone, muttering to himself. Her curiosity piqued. She noted the absurdity. Humans moving so frantically yet failing so spectacularly at coordination. She almost laughed. If such a sound could leave her throat without causing a minor sonic disturbance. Her mission was official, a diplomatic gesture to bridge her people with Earthlings. But already, her mind wandered into more peculiar curiosities. The humans' interactions, far from efficient, were rich with subtle rituals she had never witnessed. They exchanged glances, awkward smiles, and physical touches that seemed entirely unnecessary for practical purposes. Their tiny gestures, hands brushing or shoulders stiffening, fascinated her. She adjusted the crown of her radiant hair, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a species that measured intelligence in wavelengths and energy resonance. These creatures, she concluded, were utterly primitive but endlessly entertaining. Her path took her to a tall glass building, walls gleaming in the morning sun, humming with fluorescent lights and human chatter. Inside, the princess adopted a disguise, slight adjustments to her height, posture, and voice, enough to blend into the office ecosystem without causing panic. The humans here seemed blissfully unaware of the galaxy's most powerful diplomat wandering among them. She drifted past cubicles, observing every subtle nuance, the nervous stammer of the new intern, the flirtatious eye contact across conference tables, the calculated smiles exchanged over coffee mugs. To her, these were not mere social interactions. They were elaborate pre-reproduction rituals, oddly inefficient but captivating. She settled near the shy office intern, a young man whose nervous energy radiated like a weak star about to collapse. He fumbled with papers, his glasses slipping down his nose, cheeks reddening as he glanced at a coworker passing by. The princess's mind raced. This was an ideal candidate to study. Humans, she concluded, were far more delicate than her species, fragile, unpredictable, yet surprisingly resilient. She leaned closer, pretending to search for a stapler, and watched as he froze, fumbling the stack of documents in his trembling hands. The subtle tremors of excitement, or was it fear, were fascinating. Her curiosity evolved into obsession. Every interaction was a potential lesson in human reproductive behavior. She scribbled mental notes on the intern's responses, avoidance tactics, nervous gestures, subtle glances. The more she observed, the more she realized her species' methods were far superior, predictable, efficient, and precise, but undeniably dull compared to these elaborate, chaotic human customs. The humans' rituals, though inefficient, were laced with humor, tension, and an odd charm that seemed to increase reproductive success through sheer psychological manipulation. She considered this deeply, her thoughts dancing between admiration and scientific intrigue. It was lunchtime when she decided to escalate her observations. She followed the intern to the break room, noting the human's careful selection of sandwiches, the hesitance as he poured coffee, the way he adjusted his tie like it might magically improve his confidence. The princess, ever bold in her curiosity, attempted her first, human engagement, a simple smile, exaggerated enough to convey friendliness but subtle enough to intrigue. The intern looked up, eyes widening, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. His reaction confirmed her hypothesis. Humans were painfully, hilariously reactive to even the smallest gestures of perceived interest. She seated herself at a nearby table, deliberately spilling a tiny amount of sugar onto the counter. A human reflexively bent to help, apologizing profusely as if the sugar were a catastrophic offense. She allowed herself a small laugh, the sound melodic and entirely alien, yet it carried a teasing undertone. The intern stammered, cheeks pink, muttering something about her intentional clumsiness being distracting. She raised an eyebrow, inwardly amused. Yes, the humans were capable of verbalizing internal arousal. Or was it confusion? Either way, it was a promising start. Her experiments continued with increasing audacity. She adjusted her posture to mimic what she had seen in romantic comedies: crossed legs, tilted head, and a hand brushing an imaginary lock of hair behind the ear. The intern reacted instantly, heart rate spiking, eyes darting between her hands and her face. The human's behavioral responses were far more extreme than her initial simulations had predicted. Each gesture seemed to amplify tension, and the princess, ever analytical, cataloged every blush, stumble, and nervous laugh. The adult humor of the situation was undeniable. Here she was, a galactic princess, conducting research by manipulating human sexual energy with gestures she barely understood herself. The break room became a testing ground for subtle sexual comedy. She poured cream into her coffee with exaggerated slowness, watching the human in turn mirror her motions. She noticed the way his hands lingered on the cup longer than necessary, fingers trembling. She commented in a soft, sultry tone. "Careful, humans seem so delicate. Your coordination is intriguing." The intern froze completely, stammering, and she noted internally that the combination of observation and indirect suggestion was far more potent than any theoretical study she had conducted on her homeworld. By mid-afternoon, the office had become a labyrinth of minor interactions charged with sexual tension and humor. Coworkers whispered, exchanged knowing looks, and tried to interpret the princess's gestures. She, blissfully unaware of the gossip she had generated, leaned on her newfound confidence and planned her first real attempt at human multiplication. The notion was absurdly literal in her mind. If she wished to understand reproduction fully, she must experience it firsthand, using the human's strange and complicated rituals. Her plan involved leading the intern to a private consultation under the guise of cultural exchange. She prepared mentally, reviewing every human behavior she had observed: eye contact, hand placement, vocal inflections, subtle teasing, and the strategic combination of awkward humor and flirtation. She intended to test the limits of human stamina, patience, and subtle sexual response, treating the entire encounter as both research and amusement. The adult humor in her plan was deliberate, her mind cataloging every potential embarrassment for the human as a lesson in reproductive strategy. By the end of the day, she had observed enough to feel both confident and dangerously curious. She considered how humans combine vulnerability with desire, clumsiness with intent, and nervousness with fascination. Each observation had sparked an idea for her first attempt, and she walked back to her temporary lodgings with the gleam of a strategist plotting a conquest. But in this case, conquest of human reproduction. The intern remained blissfully unaware that he had become the center of intergalactic curiosity, his every blush and stumble noted for future experimentation. The princess reclined in her quarters, reviewing mental notes and imagining the potential outcomes. Her superior alien physiology made her confident, but the unpredictability of human behavior excited her in ways she had not anticipated. The section closed with her final thought. She would attempt human multiplication, not as a conquest of flesh, but as a scientific exploration of humor, desire, and chaos, a comedy of errors that only humans could produce so flawlessly. The stage was set for awkward, erotic, and hilarious encounters that would follow, each steeped in sexual comedy, dark humor, and the absurd brilliance of Earthlings. The princess's curiosity had escalated into full-blown fascination. She observed the intern from across the office, noting every nervous twitch, every faltering glance, every flush that betrayed his rising awareness of her attention. Humans were far more reactive than she had anticipated. Every gesture, even something as mundane as reaching for a pen, seemed to carry hidden meaning, or at least he interpreted it that way. She decided it was time to initiate contact beyond passive observation. Her first approach was deceptively casual. She leaned over his desk under the pretense of helping with a report, her hand brushing his in what she imagined to be an innocent, human-acceptable manner. The intern's reaction was instantaneous, eyes widening, fingers stiffening, and a stammer that made him sound like he was auditioning for a comedy sketch. The princess noted internally that humans could experience a physiological response to minimal stimuli, a fact both amusing and scientifically fascinating. She allowed herself a small, melodic chuckle, careful to maintain the appearance of normalcy. She attempted to mimic behaviors she had seen in Earth's romantic media. When the intern spilled coffee, she dived theatrically to help him clean it up, deliberately letting her hair brush against his shoulder. The human's face turned crimson, and he muttered an apology so frantic that she struggled to suppress laughter. Each movement she made was calculated yet exaggerated, a deliberate study in sexual tension. She murmured playful commentary, barely above conversational volume, about human coordination being delightfully imperfect. The double entendre was subtle, but she noted the effect. It seemed to confuse and excite him simultaneously. The intern's attempts to respond only added to the amusement. He offered her a chair with hands trembling, dropped pens, and mumbled compliments that fell awkwardly between nervousness and unintended innuendo. The princess catalogued every response, fascinated by how humans combined fear, desire, and humor in a single gesture. Unlike her species, whose interactions were efficient and transactional, humans created an entire theater of emotion around the simplest acts of attraction. She found this absurdly entertaining and scientifically enlightening. She decided to escalate. Under the pretext of discussing a cultural exchange exercise, she invited the intern to a more private area of the office, a conference room with the blinds drawn. Her intent was purely observational. She wanted to understand human intimacy in its natural form. The intern, eager to impress yet entirely bewildered, followed her with an awkward gait. She noted that the human heart rate acceleration was more pronounced than any simulation she had run on her species. His panic was palpable, and she found it adorable. Once alone, she began her first practical lessons. She asked the intern questions about human reproduction, phrasing them as scientific inquiries. "When you humans unite your energies, what sensations are intended?" she inquired, tilting her head in what she believed conveyed both curiosity and encouragement. The intern choked on a gulp of water, sputtering. Well, it's complicated." Her internal translation of complicated was humorous. Humans had rituals layered with emotion, humor, and subtle strategy, all in service of an act that her species executed with precision and speed. Her next move involved a demonstration of human-style flirting. She leaned closer, mimicking cues she had seen on holos of romantic films, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder, a playful tilt of the head, a teasing smile. The intern's reaction was instantaneous and over the top, like a circuit misfiring. He knocked over a stack of papers, muttered apologies, and fumbled for a chair to steady himself. She noted the effectiveness. Humans were highly responsive to even the slightest provocation. It was an experiment in sexual comedy, and she found the results delightful. Not satisfied with mere gestures, she attempted more advanced. Learning by doing. She instructed the intern to demonstrate basic human customs of intimacy, which he did with exaggerated caution, his face a mixture of horror and fascination. She whispered questions with double meanings. "Does it always feel this stimulating?" The intern flinched, misinterpreting the questions, and stumbled over answers, turning the session into a series of comic misfires. She laughed inwardly, documenting every blush and nervous twinge as essential data for her study of human reproduction. Her experimentation quickly led to awkward encounters involving office furniture and supplies. She had him follow her to a lounge area where she enacted a romantic scenario, using chairs, coffee mugs, and even staplers as proxies in her improvised study. Every attempt to interpret human romantic gestures was punctuated by clumsy objects, startled humans passing by, and her own alien misunderstanding of modesty. The intern tripped over the rug, spilling his coffee again, while she maintained a sternly serious expression, pretending that each mistake was part of the protocol. The adult humor came naturally, arising from tension, embarrassment, and absurd improvisation. At one point, she instructed him to hold a posture resembling a romantic embrace, while she demonstrated eye contact techniques. He complied reluctantly, his limbs trembling, creating an awkward tableau that anyone observing would interpret as either a bizarre ritual or a farce. She whispered advice like, "Keep your energy focused. Humans are surprisingly responsive to precision," causing him to stammer uncontrollably. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, but laden with suggestive undertones. The contrast of her composed demeanor and his panic created an unintentional comedy of errors. By mid-afternoon, the session had escalated further into sexual tension combined with comic misunderstanding. The princess attempted subtle teasing through physical proximity, gentle touches, and deliberately ambiguous comments about stamina and endurance. The intern's reactions alternated between panic, embarrassment, and flustered fascination. Every misstep on his part only reinforced her perception. Humans were inefficient, chaotic, and hilariously intense when it came to attraction. She noted that these complications, while seemingly primitive, added layers of psychological stimulation absent in her species' reproduction methods. The crescendo of the session came when she asked him to demonstrate a standard human romantic greeting, prompting him to awkwardly mimic a hug he had seen in a video. She intervened gently, adjusting his posture, whispering double entendre-laden instructions about energy transfer and proper alignment. The result was both hilariously absurd and surprisingly educational. Each human error, each exaggerated response, further confirmed that Earthlings were capable of creating complex tension and sexual humor without even realizing it. By the end of the day, the princess had collected enough experiential data to plan her next attempt. She left the intern in a state of frazzled fascination, cheeks still flushed, trying to rationalize the day's events while coworkers whispered behind hands and monitors. She retreated to her quarters, mentally replaying each interaction, noting every blush, stumble, and awkward response. Her mind whirred with potential experiments, lessons, and practical applications for understanding human multiplication. The section closed with her final thought. Humans were chaotic, clumsy, and absurdly effective at creating sexual tension, and she intended to exploit every nuance in her next session. The next day, the office buzzed with an unusual energy. Whispers rippled through cubicles like a low hum of gossip, fueled by strange observations from the previous afternoon. The princess arrived, radiant and oblivious to the chatter she had generated, her attention focused entirely on the intern. Every step, every gesture, every tilt of her head was meticulously calculated to provoke a reaction, and provoke reaction she did. The intern's palms were already clammy before she approached, and he had begun rehearsing mental scripts, only to find that no preparation could match her unpredictability. She initiated a new round of experiments with a boldness that surpassed her previous attempts. Crossing the office floor, she brushed past coworkers with what she imagined to be casual intimacy. while internally noting how humans overreacted to minimal physical contact. A glance from her was enough to send a man toppling a stack of folders, and a whispered comment about energy alignment caused a woman to flee to the restroom, muttering about odd behavior. Each reaction was a confirmation of her observation. Humans were both fragile and wildly responsive to the sexual undertones she projected, a combination ripe for comedy and experimentation. The intern, now painfully aware of the consequences of proximity, attempted to navigate the princess's path with extreme caution. He dodged her glances, avoided eye contact, and tried to blend into his chair like a camouflage expert. His efforts were heroic but futile. The princess interpreted his nervousness as enthusiasm, which fueled her next experiment, a public demonstration of human intimacy exercises. Using an empty hallway, she instructed him to mimic gestures of human affection, carefully demonstrating a playful nudge and light shoulder brush. The result was chaos. Papers flew, a passing coworker tripped over his briefcase, and whispers of office romance scandal escalated exponentially. Her adult humor emerged naturally in these moments, unfiltered and teasing. She commented under her breath with calculated innocence. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to even the gentlest stimulus. Fascinating. Every comment carried a double entendre, lost on everyone but the intern, whose eyes widened in a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. He attempted to speak, to explain, to justify the absurdity, but the words stuck in his throat. His flustered reactions became a key data point for the princess, illustrating the peculiar efficiency of human nervous excitement in sexual contexts. By mid-morning, the tension had spread like wildfire. A rumor about the strange behaviors in aisle 3 reached the office manager, who decided to intervene. The princess, interpreting his arrival as part of the experiment, continued her antics. She repositioned chairs in suggestive arrangements, instructed the intern to maintain exaggerated postures, and whispered phrases that could be construed as either professional guidance or risque coaching. The manager, witnessing the tableau from a distance, assumed a scandal of epic proportions was underway, while the actual experiment remained entirely innocent, except for the intern's complete mortification. The princess's next attempt involved subtle manipulation of office objects to simulate human intimacy environments. She lined up staplers like mini barriers of personal space, used water coolers as proxies for interactive contact, and demonstrated how to lean in just enough to provoke a blush without violating policy. Each movement was carefully observed, and each blush catalogued. She murmured comments on human endurance, stamina, and spatial awareness, her tone perfectly calm yet filled with suggestive undertones. The intern's stammered responses were a symphony of embarrassment and inadvertent humor, delighting her in ways her simulations had never predicted. In a particularly audacious moment, she orchestrated a hallway accidental collision, instructing him to appear as though he tripped, only to have her catch him in a perfectly timed embrace. The intern, interpreting this as either seduction or social suicide, froze mid-motion. His limbs flailed awkwardly, knocking a recycling bin over. The resulting crash echoed across the floor, drawing the attention of multiple coworkers. Gasps, whispers, and suppressed laughter created an audience she never intended, yet which amplified the comedic effect tenfold. The adult humor was palpable. The combination of sexual tension, public embarrassment, and exaggerated human panic was a perfect storm. As the day progressed, she began probing the intern about more intimate aspects of human relationships. She asked about hand placement, eye contact, and even vocal intonation, framing it as cultural research. Every question carried layers of double meaning, and the intern's attempts to answer were predictably disastrous. He misinterpreted her alien phrasing, resulting in awkward admissions and unintentional innuendo. She smiled inwardly, noting the psychological complexity of humans. They could create intense sexual tension without any physical contact, a skill she admired and intended to study further. The chaos culminated during an attempt to practice human romantic greetings. She instructed him to initiate a hug, and when he complied, she corrected his posture, whispered technical advice about alignment and energy transfer, and exaggerated every subtle cue. The intern, already overwhelmed, blushed, stammered, and tripped again, sending papers and a coffee mug flying. The adult humor in this situation was undeniable, the combination of awkward physicality and sexual tension producing a farcical spectacle. Observers, oblivious to the scientific nature of the exercise, assumed a scandalous romance was unfolding, adding layers of social comedy to the sexual comedy already in motion. By afternoon, the office had become a labyrinth of whispered gossip, speculative glances, and exaggerated interpretations of her actions. The intern's attempts to explain or rationalize failed spectacularly. Each encounter, each gesture, each whispered phrase was catalogued by the princess as part of her ongoing study of human reproductive behavior. The combination of embarrassment, sexual tension, and physical comedy created an experience far more intricate than any alien simulation could replicate. The princess ended the day with one final test, a private session in a conference room after hours. She instructed the intern to replicate a series of gestures observed in human media, applying what she had learned about blushing, nervous laughter, and hesitation. Every attempt resulted in a comic disaster. Chairs toppled, papers scattered, and the intern's dignity eroded further. Yet each failure provided her with invaluable data on human sexual response, relationship humor, and the intricate dance of attraction. The combination of adult humor, awkward encounters, and HFY superiority reinforced her fascination with the species. She retreated to her quarters that evening, triumphant. The office chaos she had created, the embarrassment of the intern, and the ripple of gossip through human society, all of it was more informative and entertaining than any textbook or simulation. Humans, she concluded, were chaotic, funny, and endlessly resourceful in ways her species could not replicate. The section closed with her mental note. Tomorrow, she would push the experiment further, increasing complexity, intensity, and sexual comedy, all while maintaining the guise of innocent observation. The princess awoke with renewed determination, her mind buzzing with calculations and observations from the previous chaotic day. Today's mission was clear. She would attempt the human multiplication process properly, applying every lesson learned while amplifying the adult humor inherent in human awkwardness. She reviewed mental notes, plotting gestures, expressions, and verbal cues designed to push the intern to his limits of embarrassment and fascination. Every step was planned, yet she anticipated, correctly, that unpredictability would make the results even more instructive. Her arrival at the office was met with curious glances. Whispers had circulated about the alien princess's experiments. She ignored the gossip, focusing entirely on her target. The intern was already sweating through a preemptive anxiety cycle, trying to anticipate her moves. She smiled inwardly, noting that human nervous anticipation was as potent as physical stimuli. The day began with casual gestures, light touches, and subtle eye contact, each layered with adult innuendo she delivered with feigned innocence. The intern responded predictably, stammering, blushing, and accidentally knocking over a small stack of files. She led him to a quiet corner of the office under the pretext of examining cultural artifacts. Here, she orchestrated a series of practical exercises, instructing him to replicate movements observed in romantic media while she demonstrated with exaggerated precision. Her voice carried subtle double entendres. Keep your energy aligned. Timing is everything. Humans often miscalculate intensity. The intern's attempts were comedic disasters. Too fast, too slow, too nervous. But each misstep provided her with detailed data about human sexual response and relational tension. To increase complexity, she introduced improvised props, a chair for support, a coffee mug as a symbolic object, and a stack of papers to simulate physical obstacles. Each item became part of a sexual comedy routine, demonstrating her alien perspective on human reproduction as simultaneously scientific and absurdly theatrical. The intern flailed, tripped, and muttered apologies, all while she maintained an expression of calm authority, her tone suggesting clinical observation yet dripping with innuendo. The combination of embarrassment, sexual tension, and slapstick resulted in an escalating hilarity that could have been broadcast as a farcical instructional video on human reproduction. The princess pressed further, asking intimate questions disguised as cultural research. Do humans always require verbal reinforcement to maintain focus? Is duration subjective or measured? Each phrase was crafted to generate both comprehension difficulty and sexual confusion. The intern responded with panic stammering, attempting to rationalize, over-explain, and apologize simultaneously. Every response reinforced her hypothesis. Humans were capable of creating a multi-layered experience of sexual tension, humor, and emotional vulnerability, a capability entirely absent in her species. Encouraged by his reactions, she implemented a more advanced exercise involving coordinated gestures and controlled physical proximity. She instructed him on posture, eye contact, and the subtle timing of movement, emphasizing alignment, rhythm, and energy transfer. Every correction included a playful double entendre. Do not underestimate the effect of synchronized effort. Humans respond strongly to careful alignment. The intern's body language betrayed his combination of terror, embarrassment, and unintentional arousal. Each failure was noted, analyzed, and cataloged in her mental database, a masterclass in sexual comedy. The climax of her instructional session involved a staged, romantic embrace, designed to simulate maximum tension and observation potential. She positioned herself, demonstrated technique, and whispered guidance with layered adult humor. Maintain eye contact, control breathing, ensure energy exchange is continuous. The intern obeyed, panicked and flustered, knocking over chairs and sending scattered papers flying. The resulting spectacle was a perfect storm of adult comedy, slapstick physicality, sexual tension, awkward verbal cues, and public embarrassment. The princess noted that humans' combination of humor and anxiety created outcomes far richer than any of her species' precise reproductive rituals. The experiment reached its risque peak when she instructed him to verbalize what he perceived about human pleasure. His attempts were garbled, stumbling over phrases, accidentally producing hilarious double entendres that had the princess internally cataloging every nuance. She corrected minor errors with deliberate, teasing precision, generating additional blushes, nervous laughter, and exaggerated body language. The adult humor here was multilayered: sexual tension, awkward learning, and the contrast between alien analytical control and human chaotic compliance. Coworkers passing by noticed the peculiar tableau: chairs askew, scattered papers, whispered phrases, and two figures in awkward proximity. Misinterpretation was immediate. Rumors escalated into legends. The alien princess is seducing interns, and author's romance gone intergalactic. None of it reflected reality, except for the intern's mortification, but it amplified the comedy for her observation purposes. She made mental notes of the social implications of human miscommunication, finding it entertaining and valuable for her research into mating behaviors. After several rounds of controlled practice, the princess concluded the session. She noted the intern's fatigue, embarrassment, and growing fascination as indicators of successful data collection. Her own amusement and satisfaction were high. Humans were chaotic, unpredictable, and endlessly creative in producing sexual tension and comedy simultaneously. She left the office with a sense of accomplishment, already planning further experiments that would refine her understanding of human reproduction and the social humor surrounding it. By evening, she reclined in her quarters, reviewing the day's events with precision. The combination of awkward gestures, verbal misunderstandings, slapstick mishaps, and escalating sexual tension provided a perfect dataset. Humans, she realized, were not merely primitive. They were masters of chaotic comedy intertwined with reproductive success. Her superior physiology allowed her to manipulate the scenario with ease, yet the unpredictability of human reactions ensured entertainment at every turn. She mused with amusement. In all her interstellar travels, she had never encountered a species capable of such hilarious yet effective reproductive rituals. She made final notes. Humans required humor, embarrassment, miscommunication, and awkward physicality to reach optimal reproductive engagement. Her next plan involved experimenting with higher stakes, slightly more intimate gestures, verbal double entendres, and increased coordination challenges, to push both observational learning and sexual comedy further. The intern, blissfully unaware of the intergalactic implications, would continue to serve as her research subject, his blushes and stammers now catalogued as essential contributions to alien understanding of Earth's mating culture. The section closed on a triumphant, risque note. The princess had successfully combined scientific curiosity, adult humor, sexual experimentation, and HFY superiority, leaving both herself and her human subject in a state of hilarious tension. She was ready to